if you have anything that really stands out, whether it doesn't have to be as about who you are, your sexuality, it can be where you're from and your own experiences, something that you may not know is fascinating until others tell you. And what I find then is when I'm talking about my behind the scenes television stuff, people absolutely love it. And I realize, oh, I do have a story to tell. I didn't see it in myself until others started telling me that.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Okay, everybody. So, what do you get when you cross an Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker, a passion for ancient civilizations, and a midlife creative awakening? You get Neil Laird, and frankly, you get some of the most innovative LGBTQ adventure fiction we've seen in years. On today's podcast, we're going to be chatting about the story of a man who traded his documentary cameras for a novelist's pen and transported readers from the tombs of Egypt to the volcanic destruction of Pompeii. And I'm super excited to chat more about it and some wonderful writing tips as well. So without further ado, Neil, welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast.
That was a fantastic intro. Thank you very much. I might steal that for myself.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Hey, you're more than welcome to. I think it, encompasses everything that you've done so far. And what's really cool is I actually have like a personal interest in this myself. I love the Pompeii. I mean, it's unfortunately a catastrophic disaster, but I love learning about it. It's very fascinating. And I actually went and visited the site of Akrotiri not too long ago, which is said to have been another site of like the same volcanic disruption. So
Yeah.
super cool. I'm really excited to learn more about
I'm
this.
happy to talk about that when we get to that point. I love Pompeii too. I never get tired. It's a disaster, but it's also preserved a part of history that you wouldn't have otherwise. So it's
Exactly.
been a gold mine for archaeologists, historians, and novelists for the last 2,000 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very fascinating. But before we get into that, I think it's important that we chat a little bit about yourself and learn a little bit more about you. I mean, you traveled to over 70 countries as a documentary filmmaker and then made the switch to writer. So tell us a little bit about that swap there. What was the turning point for you?
Well, always fascinated with archaeology and history, particularly ancient history. That's why I went into documentaries for television. I sold my thesis film for grad school about the Great Sphinx of Egypt to the Learning Channel, and I've pretty much been doing archaeological adventure history films for the last 30 odd years. And I absolutely love it. Over 1,000 hours of television, as you say, more than 70 countries, particularly affection for Egypt, Greco-Roman, Mesopotamia, those places. I can't get enough of them. It's just always been this thing that's always driven me creatively and emotionally. Um, but after nearly 30 years of writing documentaries and sticking on script and footnoting and going back and looking at the bleached ruins over some sand dune, I kind of wanted to have a little more fun with history. History is I know the stories about history and the characters, but the limitations of documentary television, Discovery Channel, BBC, the places I work for, it obviously has to be hard hitting history. We can't make stuff up. We can maybe bend the rules sometimes for a good connective tissue, but we have to stick to the facts. So I think about 10 years ago or so, I started getting itchy feet to kind of tell some of the stories that I had seen on my own that I couldn't bring to television. Characters, places that we didn't have the answers to, where there were a lot of supposition and guesswork and stuff that I wouldn't be able to sort of tell the story in full in a nonfiction film. So I started writing a book that I did not publish because it was my first. And as we know, your first book is always a load of rubbish. And I'm afraid to look back at it now. I'll probably be embarrassed by the glare of all the mistakes I made. But it's about ancient Egypt. And it was all about a case of tomb robbing, the oldest case in the world, the oldest known crime ever committed that we have history of. Was 3,000 years ago, a case of tomb robbers. So I knew all this stuff from my trips to Egypt, But I wanted to create characters, the evil mayor and the tomb robbers, and put you in the tomb when they're opening up Study the First and looking at the mummy. And that can only be done through fiction. So I started writing it. And it was actually two things that happened that finally convinced me to get off my butt and actually start writing it. Because for years, I always dabbled with the idea of fiction, but I was doing quite well as an executive producer for the networks and a nice salary. And there was no reason for me to rock the boat creatively. But in 2016, two things happened that I finally realized, okay, if I'm going to write a book, I better do it. One is I turned 50. And you
Okay.
realize, of course, when you're 50, there's a lot more time behind you than ahead of you. Very few of us see 100. And the other thing that happened was my great creative hero, my muse, died. And that was David Bowie. I
Mm.
have no musical talent. I couldn't pretend he was from a chord, but Bowie always fascinated me from when I was a little kid because not only was the music so adventurous and so great, but with each album, he reinvented himself. He wasn't afraid to fail. He was not afraid to take a chance and then dust himself off if it didn't work. And I knew all this, but I remember reading his obituary in January of 2016 when he died, and it reminded me once more how absolutely fearless he was to just take chances. And I remember thinking, if David Bowie can do it 26 times per album, Neil Laird can do it once. So get off your butt and write something. And that's when I started. And trial and error, of course, because when you're a TV producer, a lot of things came naturally in terms of cliffhangers, in terms of cause and effect. A lot of stuff I understood the building blocks of narrative from my nonfiction. But many other things I had to learn like a new language because writing documentaries is so different than literary. Getting inside someone's head and understanding point of view, that's something as a documentary filmmaker you never have to do. Like we're talking now, you ask me the question, I answer that internal thing for you. We personally, as a creative artist, don't have to create it. As a novelist, you do. You have to create that world inside as well. And that took a lot of time. But it was also extremely exciting. And when I finally nailed it, and actually, what got me to nail it was simply that on my early drafts, I did again. I mentioned the book was all ancient history. On my second book, an editor friend said, "Write about what you know." The oldest cliche in the book, and that's when I realized I have this other extremely interesting life, the TV producer going around the world, and also being gay. And one of the things I've always been fascinated when I travel is I always look for any kind of gay residue or historical residue that I see in Rome, Greece, and there's a lot of it. And I wanted to tell the stories of gay ancient history with a gay crew. So I have my first book that I published, Primetime Travelers, is by TV crew, two of whom are gay. Best friends, a man and a woman. And it's the first book is about Jared, the lead character, coming out, and Kara dealing with the grief of losing her girlfriend. And then I could tap into my own world. I could bring all my own experiences of what it was like to be a young kid in Egypt, coming out or dealing with sexuality when I traveled. And my best friend is very much Kara, the camera woman who's tough as nails, but is also dealing with grief. So I brought a lot of my own experiences into that. And that's when I think I really found my voice.
Well, that's an extraordinary way to come about the writing world, for one. And I love what you did there. You found what you knew and you turned it into a story that incorporates all those elements, which, to me, it might take me a minute to wrap my head around, like, how am I going to make it work? But for you, it seems to have come pretty naturally. Now, here we are with the Primetime Travelers series. There's two of them out that I found myself. Is there more that I should be looking out for? I know I found two that I was looking through.
Yeah, there are two that are out there. Primetime Travelers, which is ancient Egypt. That's the first one, and then Primetime Pompeii, the second one.
Ah, yes. Yep.
And now I'm finishing up Primetime Troy, and they go back to ancient Greece and the Trojan War.
Nice. I
And so
love.
that I have to wrap up the next. In fact, I'm best when I write. I need a couple of things to really, I think, to finally find my focus. One is a gorgeous view, and ideally a ruins or something over something glorious and transporting. So I wrote the first book overlooking the Nile. Second book, I rented a villa near Pompeii in Naples for a month and would travel there every day and find all this stuff about ancient Pompeii and Herculaneum and come back and put in the book. And then next week, I'm heading to Athens for a month with a lovely little condo overlooking the Acropolis. I'm going to finally finish the book with a great sunset view.
That's incredible. And I love that you're able to travel and like really immerse yourself in that world. So
really exciting that you're also working on, that another book too, something we could all be looking forward to. And I've been to Athens myself. It's a beautiful city. You're gonna love it. I'm sure you've actually been there before, but
I've only been to Athens once, and I'm really keen to spend a lot of time there.
perfect. Yeah, and that's just a great way to get the inspirational juices flowing. But to talk a little bit about your books in itself, you blend time travel, you blend historical fiction, TV satire, romance. So I guess I'm curious to know how you maintain all that together while also being factually accurate and just what is your process like? I just have to know how can somebody blend so many different things together and still have it come out so successfully and interesting.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure if I have a formula for it. I always start with the historical stuff. That's
Mm.
why I like to be on location. The history comes natural because I just love. So when I went to Pompeii, I already kind of knew all the facts. I could bore you for 6 hours about the eruption, hour by hour. So that stuff I already kind of come equipped with. And then I think the characters just come out of. I'm very much a seat of the pants kind of person. I don't organize everything, but I know my characters by in short, my books are all about a TV crew finds a portal, it can time travel to the past. And it's very satirical because I make fun of my own career and the television. And the whole concept is they want to win an Emmy, and they're going to do that by going back to Pompeii. So I can lean into what I know about my world, but I can also blend out what I know about the history. And somehow I was able to find that voice, I think, with the characters through just working it and working it. I like to workshop it a lot. I make sure friends read it so they kind of get back and say this bit slow or this feels a bit too on the nose. So there's still not, it's not like it comes to me straight away. But I think I know the characters, I know the history, I know the time, the places so well that I'm just able to blend them together fairly seamlessly. And out comes Primetime Travelers.
Understood. Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like it just kind of came out of your pure passion, I guess you could say overall, right? Like you just love this topic so much and you're so much
Yeah.
about it. So it just happened, I guess you could say, in a way.
Yeah, hopefully it shows as I talk about it because I can never get enough of that part of the world, the Mediterranean and history. And there's something about it I just find endlessly fascinating. So to be able to bring those stories to life, like for example, the second book, very briefly, Primetime Pompeii, I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to go to some place. It's either going to be Greece or Rome or Mesopotamia or someplace in the Mediterranean. And then there was a story that had just hit the news, which answered that question for me. About 100, you've been to Pompeii, so you know about the plaster casts. And if you go through the main gate, I think it's called the theater gate or whatever, with the gift shop and everything, you'll see a bunch behind plain glass. And then one of them was found in like in 1803, and they called it the Two Maidens because there was two people clutched together. One looks a bit smaller on top of the other's chest, and they're holding each other tight as this pyroclastic flow clearly came down and killed them. They were stuck in an alleyway called a cryptoporticus, which is a covered little alleyway. And for years, they called them the Two Maidens because they assumed that it was a mother and her daughter. So
Right.
3 or 4 years ago, they finally were able to find some DNA and some bone fragments within them, and they discovered a few remarkable things. One is they were both male. They were both about 30 to 40 years old, and they were not related.
Mm.
So there goes the Two Maidens. Now,
Yeah.
it could be a shopkeeper, it could be a tanner hugging the baker as the pyroclastic flow catches up. But I'm not sure you would do it with a stranger or a colleague from across the alleyway. So we don't know the relationship of these people. Clearly, we never will. But what we do know is that in history or in narrative, you can make any story you want. So I made them two gay characters. So the key when I did that, I said that's the story I want to tell. So Jared and his crew go back to find out the identity of who these two embracing lovers are, and they
I
do find them with the as Pompeii starts to collapse.
Yeah, and again, it's really awesome that you're able to weave those kinds of themes in there just by finding, hey, here's a piece of historical fact that we know about. Let me, come up with that story there and really advocate for these, the stories that aren't always told, I guess you could say, you know what I mean? Funny enough, I'm sure you've done a ton of research. I know there's a ton of graffiti all over the city. A lot
Mhm.
of them are actually anti-gay and pro-gay too. I've read. Have you researched that a little bit, just as a fun fact? Because I thought
Well,
that.
yeah, I mean, I guess the question if it's pro or anti, if they even put those words on it,
All right, yeah.
sexuality meant such a different thing back in ancient times, and in many ways, it was more open than it is today. Now they
Yeah.
still had, particularly by Roman time, they still had stipulations in terms of, you could have a wife and kids. You can do anything you want, but still have a wife and kids, whatever. So a lot of times the graffiti was just making fun of somebody for losing a gladiatorial game. Um, but other times you find there's a place called the House of the Vati, which you might have been to. It's one of the most opulent villas in Pompeii, and it is decked out with like a bunch of beautiful men with extremely large penises everywhere. Now it could be the god of abundance, or it could be two gay guys who would just have a fabulous decorator. You know, we just don't
Right.
know. But clearly, the sexuality and embracing the male form and stuff in the male household was not something that was it wasn't dismissed as homophobic. So while we don't know exactly what was pro and anti in terms of same-sex love, we do know it was accepted, and we do know that it was very common. So I do a bunch of videos for TikTok called Primetime Travelers, where I explore ancient gay history. And I look at some of the classics like Alexander the Great and Hadrian and Achilles and all the others, and talk about samurai. I talk about separate the truth from the fact about gay history.
Right.
And what we learn is that, again, in ancient times, it was like do whatever you want. It really wasn't until the rise of Christianity in the fourth, fifth century when that kind of came verboten, that kind of became taboo.
Understood. Um, yeah, really cool. I love diving into these facts. It's very fascinating stuff. So let's transition a little bit into the writing process itself. In case anybody's interested, Neil does have a ton of blog posts out there, tips and tricks for writers already. So we're in for a treat here. One quote that I found was really cool from one of your blogs that you sent my way was that when writing is really working, someone sharper and more confident takes over. So tell us a little bit more about that. How do you know when a difficult story decision feels right?
Look, every writer has their own method, obviously. So anyone listening who's a writer, whether a budding writer or already a polished writer, don't change what you're doing because of how I work. I very much fly by the seat of my pants, as I said, where I just sort of have an idea, and once I get excited about it, I just sort of dash it out. I don't worry about the spelling. I don't worry about crappy dialogue. I don't worry about any of that stuff. Sometimes it's just sort of bullet points but I have to keep moving forward and getting the idea on paper. And I think what you're referring to is my last newsletter talked about when I was writing Primetime Troy, which I'm just wrapping up. I just had maybe 30 or 40 pages of revisions at the end.
Mhm.
And I thought I had it all sussed out. And then I went through again and I didn't like what I was writing, but my fingers almost took over. My fingers kind of knew the right way to solve it. And what they did was they killed one of my lead characters that I was kind of afraid to do. I was kind of sheepish about going there. And somehow my fingers, as if they're separated from my brain, just started typing this. And I thought the best thing to do was sort of let go back and let the automatic writing take over. And this is not anything spiritual. This is just whatever's inside my head was just getting itself out. And rather than trying to censor it through logic or stopping and stepping away, I just got it all done. And when I looked at it the next day, I thought, oh, holy crap, that's exactly what I need. And it wasn't anything that I had outlined or planned before. It just was something that was inside of me that finally, by trusting the process, came out.
Understood. Yeah, I guess that's really all you can do is trust the process, right? And as we mentioned before, it's more of like when you have a passion for something and you know what you've lived the experience yourself. It's a matter of just meshing those ideas into something else. I guess it could just kind of flow, and you just gotta trust your intuition.
Yeah,
I love
and
that.
look, it doesn't always work. The next day, you could look at it and say it's absolute rubbish, and you can delete it. No harm done. It's just you and your computer. So again, there's nothing at stake other than trusting your gut and sort of just trusting your instinct, I think. Other writers I know, they live by an outline and like to stick to the outline. And there certainly is a great benefit in that because you might write a little quicker. You might know exactly where you're going from the beginning. My brain doesn't function that way. I know what I knew about this one was I knew they want to go back to ancient Troy. I knew each of my book focuses on a different. I have four lead characters, the film crew, and each of my book focuses on a different character. So I knew it was time for another character to step forward. So once that person became the lead, my voice shifted, and it became that person's story and that background story. So each of them kind of feels fresh. So rather than trying to outline it all the way out, since I don't know that character that well, again, I just trusted the process to let it sort of run roughshod over me.
Right. Yeah. Just again, trusting the process and trusting your own intuition. And it's interesting because I think you might have mentioned to me that Primetime Tory involves a character's death. Not to spoil anything to the listeners, but you weren't planning that, if I'm understanding correctly. Is that true?
Well, any writer listening knows you fall in love with your characters, right? And you know your characters so well because, of course, they come from your brain that you don't want to just kill them off. You want to save them. You want to be their protector, whatever. And these four characters, the camera person, the director, the sound guy, and the host, these are the core group of this TV show that goes back in the past to make these films. So any one of them, any one of them disappears, you can't make the film theoretically. So in my logical brain, none of them can die. But something about what I was writing with the Trojan War, and Troy is a very interesting thing without going too deep down in the rabbit hole of Homer and Troy, but it's all about fate. If you've read any of the ancient Greek texts, you know that the very early start in Troy is about Achilles going off to war knowing he's going to die. But the question is, do you want to live in anonymity entire and not go to war and have a nice long life to 60 or 70, or do you want to go die young and be remembered forever? Clearly, Achilles chose the latter, and here we are talking about him 3,000 years later, if indeed he existed at all. But the whole idea of it being bigger than you. So, with that in mind, when I was on the battlefield of Troy and writing the scenes, I realized, well, these characters have to live in that world as well. They have to live in the ancient Greek and Trojan world, just like everybody else. So the death of one of them seemed very natural, seemed very much in keeping with the world that I had created, that I dipped into.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Again, I guess this really all goes back to that same concept. I think it's like a good core philosophy then, right? Just kind of seeing where things go and trusting the intuition. And yeah, and of course all the historical background that you're just mentioning too about Troy. It's you know, you're playing into the historical facts while also following that passion, which is really cool. And you're saying true to your identity also. I mean, you talk a lot about, LGBTQ rights. And I guess that being said, there's so many other authors out there who are trying to do something similar, right? So
Mhm.
what would you recommend to recommend to them if they're trying to follow your path? If
I mean, I would definitely try to find what your identity is, what makes you stand out, because as we know, whether you're traditionally publishing or self-publishing, the competition is so stiff. And time travel, for example, is so stiff. Ancient history, historical fiction is so stiff, is so strict that what makes Neil Laird unique, and what made me unique were the things I leaned into. My day job as a TV producer, I still produce television. I'm not out of the game completely. I'm working on a History Channel film now about Egypt, and also being gay. And I've been out for 30 odd years, and when I pick up an action adventure novel, I never see a gay character. I don't understand why that is. And my books are not like some sultry, hot and heavy romance. So there is emotional romance. And I just want to tell strong stories, positive stories about LGBTQ characters. And no one else is writing them. So I figured that's what Neil Laird can do. So I think, to answer your question, if you have anything that really stands out, whether it doesn't have to be as about who you are, your sexuality, it can be where you're from and your own experiences, something that you may not know is fascinating until others tell you. And what I find then is when I'm talking about my behind the scenes television stuff, people absolutely love it. They can't get enough of what's it like to be chased by a bear on an Animal Planet show and stuff like that. And I realized, oh, I do have a story to tell. I didn't see it in myself until others started telling me that. So I think any writer, ask yourself what does make you stand out even a little bit, and it may not be apparent to you until you start writing it. But there's something about every writer that is different than somebody else.
Yeah, I like that. You got to figure out what it is that makes people want to read your book over others. There's so many books out there, so finding your own strength only amplifies that and draws people to you even more. So that's great. So you mentioned you have a lot of content out there for resources, people to check out for your documentaries and for the writing. Where is the best place for people to find you, and where can they learn more and get connected?
Well, my books are available on Amazon.com. They're self-published on Amazon and Kindle. So both the two books are there, Primetime Travelers and Primetime Pompeii. I have a newsletter, neillaird.com. You can sign up. If people are interested in this and they're curious about Primetime Troy, when I get there, I'm going to obviously want beta readers and people to follow in. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I put a newsletter out every month or so talking about where I am, sometimes some short stories, both my television work and my TV work. So that's the best place to find me.
Well, perfect. We're going to put the links in the description box of the podcast today. So if you're, interested, go ahead and click on over, but wait for the podcast to be done, of course, because we're not quite done yet. We are getting close to our time together wrapping up. But, speaking of time and time travel, I guess, one last question for you then. What would you say to aspiring authors who feel like they've maybe missed their moment or that it's too late to chase their creative dreams? I know that's something that, you struggled with a little bit before you decided to dive into the world and make that transition. So what would you say?
It's never too late. Absolutely never. When I was 30 or 40, no, because when I wrote 50, I was ready for it. I was ready to jump in. So I don't care if you're 80, if you're 20, or if you're retired or whatever. Do it now. All I can say is if you feel the urge, do it now. And don't be afraid to fail, or don't be afraid for the rejection, because you will get it early on. You're going to have to learn to fall on your face before you find that voice. So yeah, do it.
And just get started. Yeah, don't let the fear talk you out of it. Exactly.
Yeah, it's so
Uh,
easy. The longer you wait, the more it compounds it. I tell people, well, I wanted to write it 5 years ago, but now that it's 5 years later, it feels even worse to start because it's 5 years later of ruminating on it. Don't let that fear get away, because then you'll regret it later on. Why didn't I do it when I was 60? And you're 80. Just write it.
Just get writing. No, that's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think anybody could really resonate with that because we all have those fears, but if you let yourself succumb to them, then you're never going to get that book out there. And anyway, so might as well get started. Um,
Exactly.
so thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been a real pleasure. Everybody, if you're listening today, you could find the Primetime Traveler series online, and we're going to put all the links in the description box of this podcast today. It's been a really inspiring conversation. I really appreciate you have coming onto the show. I think that the story just, reminds us that sometimes the most important books are the ones that don't exist yet until we can write it, right? It's the only ones, but
Correct.
your experiences are the ones that you can put into the written word and bring to life. So
Exactly. If you don't see it on the shelf, then write it.
exactly, exactly. All right. Well, thanks again, Neil. And to all of our listeners, until next time, keep questioning, keep creating, and remember that your story matters. So we'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.